Alright, so today we're going to cover the Geco tag, which covers four different orders: Gruiformes, Europygiformes, excuse me, Cariamiformes, and Otidoformes. Okay, Otidoformes, the family of interest here is Otididae. It's the only family of Otidoformes that we have to worry about, and that are the bustards. And there are two bustards, yes, two bustards that we have to worry about in the tag. Um, the first is Artiotis cori, the cori bustard, which is a near threatened species. Threats to it are habitat destruction, hunting pressure, and collisions. Um, uh, the collisions thing is kind of interesting. Bustards have fairly poor binocular vision. Maybe poor is not the right word for it. They have blind spots in their vision, and so they tend to collide. They don't see things that are coming. They get hit by cars, but they also run into like electric lines and things like that. Um, Ground lines in particular. And so because they're susceptible to uh, running into these and colliding with these things, they die. These are man-made things that they have trouble seeing, and they die. And then particularly, it's the lines are a problem. The power lines are a problem because um, they're so thin. Now, to us, they don't seem that thin, but they're pretty hard for them to see. They're thin and they have all these blind spots, and it's just really easy for them to run into them and die. Um, they are omnivorous. They have a highly varied diet of plants and vertebrates and um, small vertebrates. And that's the case for, I'd say, a lot of species in this group. Their diets are fairly similar. So the Cory bustard is native to Africa, and there are two subspecies, Struthionculus and cori. Um, Struthionculus is found in that upper blob here, right here, and cori is found down here. So Struthionculus is in places like Ethiopia and Kenya and Tanzania, and cori is found in South Africa and Angola, primarily, and places around there. There are sedentary species of arid grasslands and savannas. They also like other very open types of habitats where they like to forage. Our other otitiform bird is the buff-crested bustard, Lophitis gindiana, which is a species of least concern. Their diet is fairly poorly studied, but they have been recorded eating seeds, uh, green parts of vegetation, and insects. They are from Africa uh, and the area of Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Somalia, Uganda, and South Sudan. They are a sedentary arid brushland species. That's all of our otitiform birds. We have one gruiform uh, bird in the family, Rallidae. Um, Rallidae are rails. I wrote Rallidae twice. Rails and crakes and things like that. Zepornia flavirostra is the bird in the tag that we have to take a look at. Rails tend to have these large spread out toes like you can see in this example, which they use for walking on vegetation and when they're wading about. So if you see that bird and think, man, that looks weird, and it's an adaptation for walking around in a marsh. They're a species of least concern that eat a lot of worms, mollusks, crustaceans, insects, fish, frogs, and a little bit of aquatic vegetation. So they tend to be, they lean into being quite predatory, uh, but they do eat a little bit of aquatic vegetation. The black crake is from sub-Saharan Africa. I'm overgeneralizing, listing every single African country that they come from would be excessive. It's essentially sub-Saharan Africa. You can see there are a couple places where they're not present. Um, they move during the dry season into wet areas, but they're otherwise sedentary. And they prefer wetlands that have a moderate amount of vegetative cover. Our other gruiform family is Gruidae, and this is the vast majority of this tag. These are cranes. This is a group of birds of tremendous conservation importance because darn near all of the gruiforms are something at a worse status than least concern. Is I think the best way to think of it. It's not all of them, but it's really close. So there are quite a few cranes in the Geco tag. The first is Balearica regularum. The gray-crowned crane is an endangered species. This is going to be a recurring theme. I'm going to be saying the same thing a whole bunch of times, which I don't really love to do, but it's just the truth. A major cause of concern to this species, as you will see it is for a bunch of them, is the draining of wetlands. In this case, they're breeding areas, but we're talking about wetland draining. Overgrazing, creating competition for food resources with cattle, illegal trade, and generally poor agricultural practices that create things like significant pollution. This is true of so many of the African cranes. These are the eaters primarily of things like the seeds of sedges and grasses. They do eat some amount of insects, crustaceans, and small vertebrates as well. The impacts of drought on these African species are hard to emphasize enough. It's drought and all the problems associated with that are the things that really affect these birds. The response of people to the drought, doing things like damming waters and irrigation, these things all affect the ability of this bird to survive. There are two subspecies across the range. You can see the range includes places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya, down into South Africa. They are species of wetlands and open grasslands, and now are mostly found in habitats that are in some way, shape, or form human modified, and they are considered sedentary. The black crowned crane, which looks similar until you just compare the two side by side, then they don't look so similar anymore. Even just look at the facial pattern and you'll see like, oh, the facial pattern's different. So it looks really close to the gray crown crane, but it's not. At close inspection, that goes away. Balearica pavonini is a vulnerable species. The story's the same between this species and the gray crown crane. It's primarily drought driven. You have all these droughts. You have people damming up rivers. You have people irrigating. You have people draining agricultural land, or I'm sorry, draining wetlands to create agricultural lands. And there's just the extent of wetlands that these birds require is just not prevalent like it used to be in its range. That's the issue. In terms of diet, it's also pretty similar to the gray crowned crane. Plants with some inverts and small vertebrates thrown in. There are two subspecies of black crowned crane. They are sort of like they're in a sub-Saharan strip that runs latitudinally across Africa in just this little band, right? Like you can see, so if you get above this, you're in the Sahara. So you're sub-Saharan, but you're just in this little strip. They're sedentary, though there is some evidence that suggests otherwise. So, for example, in some parts of their range, in certain areas of their range, they're only seen for a few months out of the year, and then they disappear. And this is really a case where either someone's not looking enough, or someone's looked a lot, but they haven't tracked the birds to figure out where they're going to really determine if they're truly migratory in some parts of their range. And that's actually very possible. Um, you can essentially think of this as saying they're sedentary, but we don't have enough information to rule out some amount of migration. These are species associated with wetlands and grasslands. These are essentially a different, I don't want to say that because I don't want to confuse you. They're different species, but they are so much like gray crown cranes. Like their diet's the same. Everything is the same. They're very, very similar. Um, the white-naped crane, Antigone vipio. So Antigone vipio is a vulnerable species. Main causes of that are significant agricultural conversion in the core of its breeding range. These guys breed in China and Russia mostly, and Mongolia, which we'll look at in a minute. They are fed artificially in Japan, in one of their major overwintering areas. This has been noted as causing disease outbreaks, and other species of cranes that also visit that area of Japan that get fed artificially have also been susceptible to these disease outbreaks as well. So this is something else that has threatened this species. In terms of diet, they are primarily eaters of roots and tubers of wetland plants. They do eat rice and some small insects and invertebrates. Here you can see the range in East Asia. So the breeding part of their range, this is a migratory species, of course. They have a breeding part of their range and an overwintering part. As again, it's in Russia, China, and Mongolia. And they winter in parts of China. They winter in Japan. And some of you might know what this is, this little area here. That's the DMZ. That is, if you're familiar with Korea at all, so that's North and South Korea, and that is the demilitarized zone that sits between North and South Korea. Interestingly, that's one of the places that they overwinter. They are a species of shallow open wetlands and are also often associated with grasslands. All right, the Saurus crane, Antigone is a vulnerable species, and it's vulnerable for a number of reasons. Draining of wetlands, loss of wetlands is huge. I used to teach wetlands. You would be maybe shocked at how many wetlands across the world we have destroyed. And we continue in some parts of the world to do that. And it happens for a lot of different reasons. But draining the wetlands is a huge impact on these birds. Agricultural expansion, which tends to be associated with wetland draining in many cases. Human development, pollution, and even some illegal trade affect the Saurus crane. It has a generalist diet, so that means it eats a bit of plant material, invert material, and small vertebrate material. That's kind of what I mean by generalist diet. It's a little bit of everything. So its range for its three subspecies, so Antigone, is in Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. You also have Sharp-eye and Gillay. Sharp-eye is in Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos, and winters in Vietnam. And then you have Gillay, which is just in Queensland, so down here. So this bubble is Gillay, this bubble is Sharp-eye, this bubble is Antigone. It is migratory in only one part of its range. That's kind of an interesting thing. A lot of birds and many groups that are migratory, it's like they're either migratory or they're not. It's not like they're migratory some places and not migratory others. So it's kind of cool. Here in this part of the range, they are migratory, right? So Southeast Asia, But here in like India and Bangladesh, they're not. Here in Queensland, they're not. The wattled crane is such a cool crane. It's crazy looking. Um, Grus carunculatus is a vulnerable species which is susceptible to habitat destruction through manipulation of hydrology. This is the same exact story as the gray-crowned crane, for example, where you have damming and irrigation and draining of wetlands highly, highly affecting this species. And this species is particularly dependent on wetlands, as we'll talk about in a minute. So it's a really big deal. One of the reasons they're very dependent on wetlands is because one of their preferred food sources are the tubers and rhizomes of aquatic vegetation. They do eat some invertebrates as well. It's native to Africa. You can see that we've got quite the weird distribution map here with lots of patches where it is known from Ethiopia all the way down to um, South Africa, Mozambique, etc. It is strongly dependent on wetlands, particularly shallow sedge-dominant wetlands, because it not only does it look for food in those places, that's where it breeds. So those are its breeding locations. So you've got this dependency for food and breeding. They're not as willing to go poke around a grassland as some of these other species are, and that means that the loss of wetlands is a really big deal for a wattled crane. And as far as movements are concerned, they're nomadic. They go where the water goes. You can pretty much say that about all of the cranes to some extent. They go where the water goes, but they're not migratory. The demoiselle crane is our only, in the tag at least, it's the only least concern crane, Grus virgo. Um, and it mainly eats seeds and other plant matter. It does eat some insects and small vertebrates. It is native to Central Eurasia in its during the breeding season, and then the western population um, migrates down here into South Sudan and Chad and Sudan, and then the eastern population migrates down here to India, and so you have um, two distinct wintering populations that make up this one large blob, the orange blob that is uh, the breeding population. The blue crane is such a beautiful, beautiful animal. Grus paradiseus is a vulnerable species. It is vulnerable to droughts, overgrazing. Um, these guys are susceptible to intentional poisoning because they will come into areas where their agricultural production um, is occurring, and uh, they'll attack crops, and then of course farmers don't like that. So they get intentionally poisoned because they are their diet is very plant-based. I don't actually have a point on here for that. And they also are a little bit susceptible to some subsistence hunting that happens in parts of the range in South Africa and Namibia as well. They are sedentary. They have local seasonal movements like many birds do, but they don't migrate. And they are primarily found in arid upland grasslands, though they do roost and nest in wetlands. And the red-crowned crane, Grus japonensis, is a vulnerable species susceptible to degradation of habitat in their very limited breeding range and in their wintering areas. Um, and they have a particularly difficult time because they have in their wintering areas in particular very concentrated populations. It's because they have limited habitat and the areas that they're in both really both in their breeding and wintering range. That's true. but more so in the wintering range. They get very concentrated in these little patches of habitat. And then anytime you concentrate a lot of individuals in one place, if there's a disease, it spreads very easily and causes problems. They have a generalist diet that includes plants, inverts, fish, and other small vertebrates. And so you can see their distribution here. So you have the um, China, Russia, slightly in Mongolia. I don't know, I didn't include that on the list. Slightly in Mongolia. And Japan for their breeding range, and they winter in China, Japan, and along the DMZ between North and South Korea. For cranes in this region, they're particularly strongly associated with wetlands, and particularly they prefer the deeper portions of marshes, bogs, and wet meadows. So they really like to get into the wetland, and this means that there's less habitat available for them than some of these other birds. And whooping crane. So there's two more gruids, I think, on this PowerPoint, and then there's a couple other orders to go through real quick. The whooping crane is Grus americana, and it's one of the most studied birds on the planet. It's crazy how heavily studied this bird has been. It's a North American bird. That probably helps. It's an endangered species. In 2011, there were only about 600 individuals known to live in the wild. A big part of what caused their decline was hunting in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And along with conversion of the Great Plains for agriculture. So, the Great Plains have been completely modified by humans, and that was a part of their range, and it is no longer suitable for them. Another thing that affects them greatly is within part of their range is along the Gulf Coast, such as in Texas, and the production of the Intracoastal Highway, which is a very important economic thing that we have. You may not know this, but actually just Google this. It's really cool. Google Intracoastal Highway. And what you'll find out is there's actually a series of channels that run all the way along the coast that make up a highway that's for boats. It's for shipping stuff. The construction of the Intracoastal Highway, though, destroyed a lot of wetlands, and some of that was important to the whooping crane, some of those wetlands. A big threat to these guys is genetic bottleneck, and that comes from when they were initially saved, which was in the early 1940s, or at least when they were initially attempted to be saved. There were only about 15 individuals left alive in the 1940s. So the entire population that exists today is based on the genetics of that 15 or so individuals from 90 years ago, give or take. That's a huge problem for these birds, right? They don't have a very highly varied gene pool to deal with the normal selection pressures. The primary diet we're looking at are invertebrates and small vertebrates, though they do eat some plant tubers as well. So the whooping crane, there are currently 4 wild populations. There's the Aransas wood buffalo population, and that is the only naturally occurring population that still exists. And it is this AWP population you see on the map there on the Gulf Coast of Texas. The other populations are populations that are results of the reintroduction, the Florida population, the eastern mountain population and Louisiana population. Um, and you see that it's a migratory species. You see the AWP population having its natural breeding grounds in Canada and its wintering grounds in Texas. Then you also see this reintroduced population having uh, a breeding ground and a wintering ground. And that's kind of interesting because it's a reintroduced population. It's a population established from a start of no birds. So I'm going to show you in a minute how they created uh, this migratory uh, behavior. It's pretty neat. Um, but there's also, like in the Louisiana population, they don't migrate out of that population. Same in the southern Florida population. Let's take a look at. So to do this, this is crazy. It's so cool. I don't know how many other times this particular strategy's been used for any species, but it's an amazing thing with these cranes. To teach young birds migration patterns, they basically use an ultralight aircraft as a dummy bird. Um, and these birds, I should say, they're costume or puppet reared, so they think they're being fed by a big crane. They don't think when they're being reared that they're being fed by people. They're not used to people. That's a big part of this. I might I might have to show you an example of puppet rearing. I don't really have that. Hmm. It's pretty cool stuff. I'll see if I can find an example. Maybe I'll put it in a different PowerPoint later. Um, but essentially, just imagine an easy way to imagine is like if I had a hand puppet that looked like a crane, and I always had a shield up that prevented the bird from seeing me, and I would reach around with my hand puppet and feed the bird. That's puppet rearing. You could do that at the costume level as well. Anyway, so these birds, to train them to take a certain migration path, you basically have a parent bird that is this ultralight aircraft with uh, a fake bird strapped to the front of it, and you fly off, and the young birds follow you, and they literally have to be taught the migration path by following this ultralight aircraft. That that's how they learn to migrate. It's really cool. The hooded crane, Grus monacal, is a vulnerable species um, that is vulnerable to habitat loss, particularly in its wintering sites in East Asia. Um, eats aquatic plants, berries, insects, and frogs and salamanders, amphibians. In winter, it will feed on seeds and grains. This species breeds in East Russia, China, uh, also winters in China, South Korea, and in Japan. It's hard to see the Japanese wintering range here, but if you look really closely, you'll see a couple little blue dots down here in Japan. It breeds in bogs and high altitude forested wetlands and winters around agricultural and riparian areas. Okay, so that's all the gruids. There's quite a few gruids in this tag. The last couple groups is all we have left to do. So Europidgiformes, Europidgidae, that's the sun bittern. And so we have just within this group, this is it. This is the whole group. The sun bittern, Europidgia helios, is a species of least concern. Mostly think of this as like a really cool little wetland predator that eats frogs, crustaceans, insects, and mollusks. And they are really stunningly beautiful birds. If they spread their wings and you look at the patterns on their wings, they're absolutely stunning. There are 3 subspecies of this bird. I did not list all of the countries because its range is it goes through a lot of different countries, from southern Mexico through Central America into South America. And the great large portion of northern South America. Um, breeds in, or its habitat and just in general is forested habitat near water. Particularly, it hangs out near streams. It'll also hang out near forest pools, things like that. And it is a sedentary species. And then last but not least, Cariamiformes, the family Cariamidae. These are the Seriemas. Now, there's some really interesting things to talk about here in terms of pronunciation. I rarely say pronunciation is interesting, but the C on Cariamiformes and Cariamidae was historically pronounced as an S. You will often hear people say something like Cariamidae today. It's basically U.S. English, but if you hear the British English pronunciation, they'll say Ceriamidae. Uh, Neither one is wrong. They're both fine to use. I don't care which one how you pronounce it. And then Seriemas are sometimes also pronounced Seriemas or Seriemas. Seriema is one of the U.S. English pronunciations. Seriema, I think, is typically the British English pronunciation. I say Seriema, that's just how I learned it. Doesn't matter. My suggestion to you would be, um, if you're at a zoo and the other people that you work with pronounce it Seriema or Seriema, just pronounce it the same way. Just meet them where they're at with the pronunciation. And so we have the red-legged Seriema, which is Seriema cristata. This is a least concern species of South America. I'll take a look at the distribution in a minute. That eats mostly arthropods, various arthropods, insects and spiders, and larvae, and then also small vertebrates. And you have a whole list of vertebrates here, including eggs and young birds. They do eat some amount of grains and fruit as well. So they're found in Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Bolivia, and Brazil, and are sedentary, open woodland, and thorn scrub species. They're also found in savannas and along wetland edges all the way up to 2,000 meters. Okay, so that is the gecko tag. I think there's about 16 species in that tag. It is a little bit bigger than some of the other tags we've looked at so far, but it's not even close to the biggest. So if you thought that was a lot of species, it's going to get significantly larger here. And oh, I don't know where my list is. I got to find my list. Oh, here and I guess that's toward the end. Okay, yeah, not for a while. Toward the end here, we have a really massive group to get through. So, anyways, if you have any questions, reach out to me, and have a great day.